Part 4, Chapter 29. When a roadside sign indicated that the Swiss border lay 30 kilometers ahead, Ambler impulsively veered off the thoroughfare and onto a small rural road. Had he been followed? Though he had detected no obvious signs, elementary prudence told him he could not afford to drive the rented Opel coupe through the border checkpoint. Laurel Holland and Clayton Casson were traveling to Zurich by high-speed rail, the TGV, which would take just over 6 hours, the bus to Davos Klosters, adding perhaps another couple of hours at the end. The train route was a popular one. They would board separately and would likely experience little trouble. But they were not the targets of a Cons-Ops authorized quote-unquote beyond salvage operation of a no less lethal SSG sanction of adversaries without name and beyond number. Mass transportation would land him into a dragnet. He had no choice but to drive, seek anonymity among the hundreds of thousands of cars on the Autoroute du Soleil. So far, so good. But the border checkpoint would be the most hazardous part of the trip. Switzerland had held itself aloof from European integration. There would be no relaxation of its border controls. At the hot Rhine town of Colmar, he found a cab driver who, once Ambler flashed a Peacock's fan of hard currency at him, agreed to drive him through Samoans to the hamlet of St. Martin on the other side of the border. The driver, first named Luke, was a pudgy man with the shoulders of a bowling pin, greasy, limp hair, and that smell, redolent of pencil shavings, rancid butter, manure, that was peculiar to the unbathed, and that a drenching with Pinot lilac vegetal aftershave did little to conceal. Yet he was also guileless and direct, even in his avarice. Ambler knew he could trust him. Ambler cracked the window as they set off, letting the chill mountain air blow in his face. His travel bag lay on the seat beside him. "You're sure you want the window down?" the driver asked, oblivious to the stifling fugue within his car. "It's freezing, mon frère, as you Americans say, colder than a well-digger's ass." "That's okay," Ambler replied politely. "A little cool air helps keep me awake." He zipped up his micro-fleece-lined winter jacket. The garment had been carefully chosen. There was little chance he would get too cold. It was 7 miles from the border town of San Morency when Ambler again felt twinges of unease, began to pick up signs, equivocal, ambiguous, far from conclusive, that he might have been detected. Mere paranoia? There was a tarp-covered jeep maintaining a constant distance behind them. There was a helicopter in a place and a time when no helicopter would normally be present. Yet a hypervigilant mind could always identify incongruities in even the most innocent of circumstances, which, if any of these things, was truly significant. A few miles from the Swiss border, Ambler noticed an aqua-blue van with a familiar license plate. He had seen it before. Again he wondered, was he being paranoid? The slanting angle of the just pre-dawn light made it impossible to see the driver. Ambler asked Luke to slow down. The blue van slowed down at almost the same time, keeping a constant distance between them, a distance far greater than a trucker's professional caution would have dictated. Unease congealed into anxiety. Ambler had to follow his instincts. We have come this far by faith. The faith that had preserved Ambler's life so far was the most austere variety of all, faith in himself. He would not waver now. He had to accept a profoundly disturbing truth. He had been found. The sun was glimmering over the horizon, a ribbon of red. The air was the temperature of a meat locker. Ambler told Luke that he had had a change of heart, that he felt like going on an early morning hike. Yes, right here, what spot could be lovelier? The transfer of more hard currency softened Luke's look of open suspicion to one of rightly amused skepticism. The driver knew he was not expected to believe the subterfuge, but if the story was counterfeit, the money was genuine. Luke did not protest. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the game. There were countless reasons someone might wish to avoid the border patrol, many having to do with the payment of luxury duties, so long as Luke's vehicle was not used for the conveyance of unreported goods, he himself was at no risk. Ambler tightened the laces of his heavy leather climbing boots, grabbed his bag, and got out of the car. A crossing on foot was not an unexpected eventuality. Within minutes, he disappeared among the snow-laden firs, stone pines, and larches, traveling parallel to the road but a good 200 yards to the side. After half a mile, he glimpsed 2 lamp-posts situated at either side of the road, powerful lights within balloon-shaped frosted glass. The custom house, dark brown wood with forest green shutters and gingerbread lattice work on a second story, cinched in by an outsized, steeply raked roof, looked like a modified A-frame. Through the trees he could see both the French tricolor, blue, white, and red, and Switzerland's own distinctive flag, a white cross on a red shield. Along the roadside, rough-hewn boulders sat near white lines, barely visible on the snow-littered pavement, adding a physical obstacle to a legal one. A low, bright orange barrier was meant to control the flow of vehicles. Doorless booths sat to either side of the road. A little past the custom house, the driver of a food service camion had obviously taken advantage of the large paved shoulder to pull over a malfunctioning vehicle. Ambler could just make out the belly and legs of a short, paunchy mechanic who was bent over its engine, his head lost in its innards. Various engine parts were strewn on the cleared pavement alongside the truck. From time to time, a muttered French curse could be heard. At the other side of the custom house was a parking area, set lower than the road. Ambler strained to see. A cloud had passed over the once glimmering sunrise. He saw a match flare from a distance, a patrol guard lighting a cigarette. That was the kind of thing that the gloom actually made more visible. He glanced at his watch. It was a little past 8 o'clock. Sunrise came late in January, and the mountainous terrain postponed the sunrise even further. He saw the canvas-top Jeep, now stationed at the lower, snow-strewn parking lot, its canvas shuddering in the chill breeze. It must have ferried over the French border guards for the 8 o'clock shift. Their Swiss counterparts would have arrived from the opposite direction. Ambler positioned himself behind a low copse of young spruce trees. Most of the mountain pines were quote-unquote limbed up. Though dense at the center, they had shed the branches that once grew at the bases of their trunks. By contrast, the spruce trees maintained a low apron of dense branches, providing cover that started close to the ground. Ambler raised his compact field glasses to his eyes and peered through an aperture between 2 interlaced spruce trees. The border patrol guard, who had just lit a cigarette, now took a deep drag, stretched himself, and looked around unwarily. He was, Ambler could tell, a man expecting nothing other than an ordinary day's tedium at the checkpoint. Through the windows of the custom house, Ambler could see a number of other guards drinking coffee and, to judge from their expressions, trading idle gossip. Seated among them contentedly was a man in a bright red flannel shirt and a pear-shaped body that told of a sedentary existence. The truck driver, Ambler guessed. Traffic was sporadic. Whatever the rulebook might say, it was hard to persuade men to stand outside in the freezing cold when the roadway remained empty save for the wind. Even without hearing the banter, Ambler could tell from the men's faces that a spirit of truculent joviality reigned. One man, though, remained apart from the others, his body language indicating that he was not part of the community. Ambler turned his field glasses toward the man. He wore the uniform of a senior official in the French Customs Authority. This was an official visitor, someone whose job was to make sporadic inspections of such checkpoints. If the others were at ease around him, it must have been because he had signaled his own indifference toward what could only have been an onerous and thankless chore. Perhaps the bureaucracy had dispatched him here as part of a regular rotation of oversight, but who would oversee the overseer? As Ambler fine-tuned the focus of his field glasses, the man's face came into sharper view, and Ambler saw how wrong he was. The man was not an officer with the Customs Authority at all. A cascade of images flashed through Ambler's mind. This was a face he recognized. After a few long moments, the sense of recognition resolved into identification. The man's name, but it did not matter what his name was. He used innumerable aliases. He had grown up in Marseille, Marseille, served while still an adolescent as a henchman for one of the drug mobs there. He was a seasoned killer by the time he drifted into employment as a mercenary in southern Africa and the Senegambia region. Now he worked freelance, used mainly in circumstances requiring great delicacy and lethality. He was an efficient killer, skilled with a firearm, a knife, a garrote, a most useful man for the non-attributable kill. In the profession, this sort of man was known blandly as a specialist. The last time Ambler had seen him, he had been blond. Now he was dark-haired. The hollow cheeks beneath high, ridge-like cheekbones and slash-like mouth remained the same, if somewhat more weathered. Suddenly the man's eyes met Ambler's. Ambler felt a pulse of adrenaline. Had he been seen? But it was impossible. The viewing angle, the circumstances of illumination, all ensured his concealment. The killer was merely surveying the scene out of the window. The apparent eye contact was momentary and accidental. It should have been reassuring that the killer remained inside. It was not. The specialist would not have been dispatched alone. If he was inside, it meant that others had been deployed in the surrounding woods. Any sense of advantage Ambler had enjoyed evaporated at once. He was being stalked by others in his trade. They would anticipate his maneuvers and counter them. The specialist might be in command, but others were nearby. The specialist would be summoned when needed. The gauntlet was beautifully conceived, taking advantage of the natural terrain as well as the official checkpoint. Ambler had to admire the professionalism. Yet whose was it? The Strategic Services team or one assembled by Consular Operations? Now, 2 border guards from the Swiss side emerged. A small white Renault van was pulling up to the checkpoint, idling before the low orange barrier. One of the guards bent down to speak to the driver, asking him the standardized questions. A face was matched with the passport photograph. It was a matter of professional discretion whether further actions would be taken. The French guard stood nearby, and the 2 glanced at each other. The driver had been sized up, a decision made. The orange barrier pivoted flat, and with an indifferent hand gesture, the white van was waved on. At the booth, the 2 men sat down on plastic chairs, adjusting their ear mufflers, their padded jackets. The woman in that Renault was so fat, she reminded me of your wife, one said to the other in French. He spoke loudly so he could be heard over the wind and through the other's ear mufflers. The other scowled in mock outrage. My wife or your mother? It was the kind of jappery, however monotonous and uninventive, that sufficed to fill the long days of boredom. Now the killer from Marseille emerged from the custom house and looked around. Follow the eyes. Ambler traced his line of sight. The man was peering at a rocky outcropping on the far side of the road. Another member of the unit was surely stationed there. There had to be a 3rd member, too, one dispatched as an observer, to be a participant only in extremis. The specialist walked over to the lamppost and then to the lower parking lot, where he disappeared behind a low brick structure, the kind of place where maintenance equipment was stored. Was he conferring with someone? There was no time to analyze the options. Ambler had to act. The growing daylight would only help his enemies. We have come this far by faith. He could get to the gray rocky outcropping along a diagonal zigzagging path. Danger was often lessened by proximity. Now he scuttled from the spruce-top copse to a distance several hundred yards up the road and stowed his bag under another copse, covering it with a mound of snow. He then clambered onto a narrow ridge which the wind had denuded of snow. With long strides he loped along the upward-sloping ridge. Then he grabbed hold of a bough from a stunted tree to pull himself up to a higher level, and thus to another ridge that would serve him as a footpath. With a loud snap, the tree bough broke under his weight, and Ambler tumbled backward, stopping himself from sliding farther downward with his outstretched arms. He tried to scramble to his feet, but plush layers of fresh, fluffy snow defeated the grooves and cleats of his soles. Simply finding traction was a struggle. With one wrong footfall, he knew he could easily tumble 50 feet down the hill, even farther. He used the stunted trees like a balustrade, leaped over rocks, forced his legs to pump harder when a frictionless snowdrift threatened his stride. He would not be shot here like a rabbit in the countryside. He remembered Laurel's heartfelt parting words, and they gave him strength. "Take care of yourself," she had said, "for me." Caleb Norris never had troubled dreams. Under pressure, he seemed to sleep more deeply and peacefully, if anything. An hour before the plane made its landing at Zurich, he awoke and made his way to the airplane lavatory, where he splashed water on his face and brushed his teeth. When he disembarked and made his way into the bright expanses of the airport, he looked no more rumpled than he did on any other day. Ironically, his weapon actually made luggage retrieval faster than it would have been otherwise. He reported to a special Swissair office that handled just such matters and marveled, not for the first time, at Swiss efficiency. He affixed his signature to 2 sheets and was given both his firearm and his overnight bag. A few other government types had also assembled in the office, a few Secret Service types, someone he vaguely recognized from joint conferences with FBI counterterrorism. From behind, he recognized a man dressed in a dark gray striped suit, but with a distinctive mop of hair dyed a shade that verged implausibly on orange. The man turned around and smiled at Norris, too cool to acknowledge surprise. Stanley Grafton was his name, and he was a member of the National Security Council. Norris remembered him from various security briefings he'd attended at the White House. Grafton was a better listener than most of the council members, though Norris suspected he also had more to say. "Caleb," Grafton said, extending a hand. "I didn't see your name on the agenda." "And I didn't see yours," Norris replied smoothly. "Last-minute substitution," Grafton said. Ora Suleiman broke something. Suleiman was the current chairman of the council and had a weakness for ponderous statements, as if she were always imagining herself as a character in a made-for-TV historical reenactment. Couldn't be her funny bone, she hasn't got one of those. Grafton smiled involuntarily. "So, anyway, they wheeled out the understudy." "Same here," Norris said. "Last-minute cancellations, last-minute substitutions. What can you do? We've all come to mouth sonorous nothings. It's what we do best, right?" Laughter crinkled Grafton's eyes. "Hey, you want to hitch a ride with me?" "Sure. You got a limo?" The other man emitted a dismissive puff. "A copter, baby, a whirlybird. I'm NSC. We gotta travel in style." "Glad to see our tax dollars at work," Norris jested. "Lead the way, Stan." He hefted his briefcase as he followed the NSC man. It actually felt better balanced with the long-barreled 9mm pistol back inside it. "Got to hand it to you, Cal. For someone who's just stepped off a plane, you look fresh as a daisy. Or, anyway, as fresh as you ever look." "Hey, like the poet says, I got miles to go before I sleep," Norris shrugged. "Not to mention promises to keep." When Ambler reached a perch that gave him a good view of the checkpoint, he took a minute to peer through snowy branches and take inventory. The specialist from Marseille, had stationed himself in the middle of the road, scanning the road for traffic, the adjacent terrain for any sign of activity. The guards in the booth were still looking bored, their fellow officers in the custom house less so, since the camion was being serviced. Its driver was still around to regale them with stories. The way down was easier than the way up. Where the terrain was too steep, he would slide or roll, controlling the rate of speed with his hands and feet, but enlisting gravity to propel his descent. Finally, he returned to the low copse of spruce trees. Copse. From a position only a few yards away, he heard a man's low voice. "This is Beta Lambda Upsilon. Have you located the subject?" He was an American, spoke with a Texan accent. "Because, for Christ's sake, I didn't get out of bed to freeze my goddamn Johnson off." The response was inaudible, no doubt piped through earbuds. He was speaking on an electronic communicator, then some sort of walkie-talkie. The Texan yawned and started to pace on the shoulder of the road, not for any purpose save to keep his feet from getting cold. There were sounds of shouting, but from farther away, from the checkpoint itself. Ambler looked out at the car idling before the orange security barrier. An irate passenger, bald, pink-faced, expensively dressed, had been ordered to step out of a chauffeured town car while the vehicle was inspected. Bureaucratic madness, the rich man charged. It was a trip he made daily, and he had never been subject to such harassment before. The guards were apologetic but firm. There had been reports. They were required to take special precautions today. He could take it up with the customs authorities. In fact, there was a visiting supervisor today. The man could take it up with him. The pink-faced businessman turned toward the uniformed supervisor and felt the stony eyes of indifference and disdain. He sighed, his protest subsiding into a general air of peevishness. Moments later, the orange barrier angled down, and the engine growled as the luxury car went on its way. Wounded dignity almost sketched across its grille. Yet the man's noisy protest had provided Ambler with cover. Though he could not change the odds to favor him, he could lessen the odds against him. He crept along a path toward the road until he spied a burly man with an expensive wristwatch, its gold band gleaming as the early morning sun emerged from a cloud. The Texan in the flesh. The watch was inappropriate garb for such a posting. It suggested an overprivileged agent with a loosely monitored expense account. Someone whose field days were long behind him and who had been conscripted into a last-minute operation because of sheer proximity. Stepping from behind a bank of snow, Ambler sprang toward him and circled his neck with his right arm and hooked his hands together on the man's left shoulder. Then he squeezed the man's neck just below the jaw between his bicep and forearm, clamping down the man's carotid arteries and inducing a swift loss of consciousness. The man, doubtless posted as an agent of record, coughed once and went limp. Swiftly, Ambler patted the man down, looking for his communicator. He found it in the lower pocket of the man's black leather coat, an expensive garment with its fur lining, but hardly suited to an extended outdoor vigil in an alpine winter. If the garment was a bad match with the assignment, it was a good match with the gold-banded Audemars Piguet on his wrist. The communicator, on the other hand, had clearly been assigned to him when he was tasked this morning. It was a small model in a hard black plastic shell with a limited range but a powerful signal. Ambler placed the tiny earbuds into his own ears, took a deep breath, and called to mind the way the agent of record had spoken. Then he pressed speak, and in a plausible Texan drawl, he said, "This is Beta Lambda Upsilon reporting in." A thickly accented voice, the harsh French of the Savoyard province, cut him off. "We told you to cease communications. You jeopardize operational security. We are not dealing with an amateur here, or if we are, the only amateur is you." The voice was not that of the Marseille assassin. It had to have been another man, a man who seemed to be running the operation. "Shut the fuck up and listen," Ambler drawled angrily. The microcom equipment provided a crisp, tinny rendering of voices, putting a premium on audibility but erasing the differences of timbre between one voice and another. "I seen the bastard on the other side of the road. Saw him dart across the parking lot like a goddamn red fox. The pisser's taunting us." There was silence on the other end, then cautiously, urgently, the voice returned. "Precisely where is he at this moment?" What should he say now? Ambler had not thought this through and momentarily drew a blank. He crawled inside the jeep, he blurted, yanked up the canvas and crawled inside. "And he's still there? I'd have seen him if he wasn't." "Okay." There was a pause. "Good work." If Ambler's cheeks weren't numb with cold, he would have smiled. The members of the killing team were in his trade. They'd think of anything he would think of. Ambler could only outmaneuver them by not thinking, by proceeding on blind instinct, moment-to-moment improvisation. Nothing ever goes according to plan. Revise and improvise. The killer from Marseille strode from the booth toward the lower parking lot, where the canvas-top personnel carrier was stationed. A powerful-looking silenced firearm was in his hand. Another howling gust of wind swept down the ravines and roadway, slamming against Ambler's back. What now? The assassin would be in a state of hyper-awareness, of hair-trigger consciousness. Ambler had to take advantage of it, had to trigger an overreaction. He looked around for a rock, for something he could throw hard, something that would arc up and land on the other side of the road. Yet an icy glaze had cemented everything loose on the ground, pebbles, gravel, rocks. Ambler retrieved the Texan's magnum pistol and removed a heavy lead bullet from the firing chamber. Now he whipped it high into the air. The gust of wind propelled it farther, and as the gust subsided, the bullet fell to earth, landing upon the vehicle's canvas top. The sound it made was disappointingly faint, nothing more ominous than a tap, yet the specialist's reaction was extreme. Without warning, the man dropped to his knees and, supporting his right arm with his left, fired repeatedly into the truck, perforating the canvas, the cushions, with a fusillade of silenced high-energy bullets. Ambler watched through his field glasses as the flurry of violence was visited upon the empty vehicle. Yet where was the other man, the Savoyard? Of him there was no sign. The mechanic, sheltered from the wind by the raised hood of the camion, continued his feckless wrenchings, doubtless knowing that his fee increased the more time elapsed. In the outdoor booth, the Swiss guard and his French counterpart sat glowering on their plastic chairs, sipping coffee and exchanging insults with the practiced ennui of two old men playing checkers. Ambler swallowed hard. Everything came down to timing. For a few seconds he would be able to cross the road without being glimpsed, and impetuously Ambler decided to do so. The Marseille killer was ruthless, remorseless, relentless. If his quarry managed to escape the gauntlet, he would hunt him with renewed doggedness. Pride of ownership was at stake. It was the specialist, Ambler realized, who had devised the ambush for him. Ambler would return the favor. He rushed behind the low brick storage building and then approached the parking lot. The specialist had reduced the canvas tarp to tatters, had ascertained that nobody was in it after all. He was now backing away from the vehicle, swiveling his head and turning around toward Ambler. Ambler had the man in the sights of the .44 he'd taken off the Texan, but knowing that the loud report of the gun would rouse the others, hesitated. Instead of squeezing off around, he would use the gun as a threat. "Don't make a move," Ambler said. "Whatever you say," the specialist lied in passable English. "Shoot him now." Ambler's instincts were practically crying out to him. "You're in charge now," the specialist said soothingly. Yet Ambler knew he was lying, would have known it even if he had not simultaneously been raising his gun arm in a fluid motion. "What the hell is going on here?" A booming voice came from behind them. One of the Swiss border guards had wandered over to the parking lot, perhaps having heard the slapping sound made by the impact of the bullets on the Jeep. The specialist turned around almost out of curiosity. "The hell is this?" the Swiss guard demanded in French. A small circle of red suddenly bloomed on the guard's forehead like a bindi, and he crumpled to the ground. An instant later, an instant too late, Ambler squeezed the trigger, and nothing happened. He remembered the bullet he had thrown, remembered too late that the firing chamber had been left empty. By then the specialist had swiveled back to Ambler, his long-barreled pistol held perfectly level, perfectly still, and aimed at his target's face. It was a shot a novice could have made, and the specialist from Marseille was nothing if not a professional.